Hi again, Dr. Dave Webster. This particular video and the accompanying letter is being sent off to ICES, or the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Services. This is an expert advisory group under the Ministry of Health, which, as its title states, is looking to assess what is clinically effective when it comes to the medical care and management of patients, and in particular how that would help government institute appropriate policy as to what OHIP should fund. This particular trial is regarding ICES's support of the PET breast cancer trial. I'm going to be addressing this particular letter to Dr. Andrei Lopakis, who is the chief representative for ICES, and particularly when the breast PET trial was run, was certainly involved with this process. And I'm going to be asking Dr. Lopakis or someone from ICES to speak on behalf of ICES and speak directly to the patients, the women with breast cancer who took part in this trial, and explain why ICES supports this trial. This trial, as you know, was the very trial that led to the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine standing up and taking the unprecedented step to declare the Ontario government PET trials as unethical and demanding they be stopped. And Dr. Aldridger ultimately resigned as the most senior member of the PET steering committee, which was involved in designing and carrying out these trials, declaring that those who were blocking PET in Ontario, what they were doing bordered on immoral. These are astounding accusations and statements, and yet ICES supports the very process that's being criticized here. Again, the details about the breast PET cancer trial run by the Ontario government and the Ministry of Health is on my PET site, and I would refer you to there for the details. But specifically to ICES, what I want Dr. Lopakis, or I hope I'm saying it correctly, Dr. Lopakis, but either Dr. Lopakis or someone from ICES to address these issues. Firstly, the Ontario government PET breast cancer trial was deliberately designed to fail. You know that. The PET scanner machine was not physically capable of detecting the vast majority of cancers that you were supposedly, or the PET steering committee was supposedly looking for. Ethical human design absolutely insists that when someone takes part in a human experiment, that there should be in some theoretical benefit to the patient or patients with similar situations in the future. So I would like ICES to explain why it supports the breast PET cancer trial when the trial was by design going to fail and had to fail. Secondly, the breast cancer trial that was run with PET deliberately excluded the very women that the acknowledged world experts had already decided was a potential appropriate reason to have a PET scan. That is, women who had known breast cancer and there was some concern. These women were anxious, were their cancers coming back? And there is, in fact, some role in patients such as this. Yet, these patients were deliberately excluded from this trial. So, again, if these trials were about, as the government claims they're about, continues to claim that they're about ensuring the most appropriate access to PET, why would ICES support the trial on breast cancer patients that was deliberately designed to fail, and yet deliberately excluded what was an appropriate access condition that people discern? Why wouldn't ICES insist that they reconsider the approach to who they were going to examine, and at least consider looking at what might be an appropriate indication according to the world experts? Now, this test, the PET scan, involves an exposure to radiation to patients. It can be as much as the equivalency of about 400 chest X-rays, and that's a non-trivial amount of X-ray exposure. A very reasonable amount if there's a good indication to do the test, but of course there absolutely wasn't, because the test was by design was going to fail. So these women had this exposure to this radiation, this non-trivial amount of radiation, when this was unnecessary. So ICES, why do you support that? Please use your support for the breast PET trial as an example of why ICES supports the way that PET is being introduced into Ontario. And along with the radiation issues, of course, something ISIS will also be aware of is that in ethical experimental design on humans, it's clear that if, when you're running a trial, that it's failing, as this trial did early on, it was very clear early on that it would fail, it had to fail, that if there's unnecessary risks to the patient, in this case radiation, not a huge risk to these patients at all, but an unnecessary risk, or that there's a better way of solving or looking for the particular issue they were trying to assess here, and there clearly was, the trial is discontinued. This trial wasn't. There were some 300 or so women who were put through this trial and exposed to some 400 chest x-rays worth of radiation unnecessarily, and ISIS supports this process. So again, please, someone from ISIS, explain to these women why ISIS supports this process. And finally, ISIS is really about looking at clinical effectivenesses in the studies that, and it assesses world literature, as it were, things written, in the world literature about diagnostic tests or treatments and so on in patients, and evaluates them so that the government can consider whether or not they would fund it through OHIP. But the tool that the government is using, evidence-based medicine approach, ISIS is well aware, is not a scientifically validated tool. This is a tool which has in fact been commented on specifically in, for example, an editorial in the Journal of Nuclear Medicine in 2009 that specifically points out the lack of scientific rigor or support or basis for the health technology assessment or evidence-based medicine tool that the Ontario government was using, and refers specifically to Ontario's capricious use of this test, really just to block access of patients to modern diagnostic imaging technology. PET scanning in this case. PET scanning, as you know, has become the world standard of care and management of cancer and other patients. Yet ISIS supports what the Ontario government is doing. So I think it's time. I think the patients that took part in this trial deserve to have someone from ISIS please explain why ISIS supports this process and endorses this process on what is being advertised as the right way to introduce modern technology such as PET scanning for patients in this province. Please do so. They deserve it. Thanks.